So good evening, everyone, and welcome to Connecticut Votes for Animals 2025 legislative session wrap-up. My name is Joshua Levin. I am CVA's Legislative and Advocacy Manager, and tonight I am joined by Alexis Bourassa, Lobbyist and Communications Director from Focus Government Affairs. Thank you, Alexis, for being here with me tonight. And once again, thank you all our CVA members for attending as well. There was a lot that took place in this 2025 session. And so before we get into all of it, I just wanted to quickly review our 2025 legislative priorities. The first of which was banning the use and sale of second-generation anticoagulant rodenticides, or SJARs. The second, banning the use of neonicotinoids, preventing bear hunting, expanding Desmond's Law, and preventing rabbit farming expansion. We will go in depth on all of these, the various pieces of legislation that are applicable to each topic. And first, though, I wanted to provide a legislative session at a glance. So from start to finish, there were 4,062 bills introduced in the 2025 legislative session, of which 275 bills passed, meaning just 6.7% made their way from start to finish through the public hearing process on their way to the House and Senate floor and over to Governor Levin's desk. Of these bills, CVA tracked over 100 proposed bills and issued 25 action alerts and submitted over 30 pieces of testimony. And due to these efforts, along with your efforts, we were able to accomplish 2 of our 5 goals, helped get 2 other bills that we supported passed, and there were 6 bills that were left unfinished. And so your legislative impact was huge this session. You guys submitted over 100 pieces of testimony, sent over 1,400 emails directly to our legislators, helped get over 170,000 social media advocacy post views, and engaged in over 7,000 content interactions. We are so appreciative of your dedicated and diligent support throughout this entire session. There was a lot that got done, and truly none of it would have been possible without your support. And so on behalf of everyone at CVA, I want to thank you all so much for everything that you did. Getting into our priority adjacent supported legislation. This is legislation that we had a strong stance on, but wasn't considered our priority topics that I had just mentioned. These bills, starting with House Bill 6277, this one required public and private higher education institutions to offer rabbits, guinea pigs, and ferrets that have been used for research or testing to be offered up to animal rescue organizations and put up for adoption. This bill did actually pass in session. Second, Senate Bill 1282. This bill was also signed into law and reduced the minimum quarantine period for dogs and cats exposed to rabies from 6 months to 4 months, and making Connecticut's procedures more in line with the CDC recommended guidelines. House Bill 5012, an act prohibiting the practice of shark finning, was another bill that we were very strongly in support of, but unfortunately this bill did not advance in the legislative process. We then have House Bill 5112. This bill would have prohibited pet stores from being able to sell dogs, cats, and rabbits. And we supported this bill because there was a strong link between pet stores selling these animals and puppy mills. And so by prohibiting the selling of these animals, we can reduce the demand from puppy mills, which are breeding facilities that prioritize profit over the well-being of these animals. Next is House Bill 6267, an act concerning cat declawing, which unfortunately did not make it out of committee. House Bill 6278. This bill would have prohibited entities that produce or test chemicals from conducting animal testing if there is an alternative testing method. So in essence, this bill is trying to help spur innovation and move away from animal testing when we are able to. House Bill 6832 is very similar to House Bill 5112. The main difference here is that this bill would allow municipalities to prohibit pet shops in their areas to not sell dogs, cats, and rabbits, whereas 5112 was a statewide prohibition. And unfortunately, this bill did not advance as well. And finally, we have Senate Bill 1154, which, if it had passed, would have prohibited the selling of helium balloons. Moving on to our priority adjacent opposed legislation. So again, bills that we are strongly in opposition to, but didn't fall in line with our priority topics. We have House Bill 7231, which allows Sunday hunting on private lands. This bill did pass in session, but has yet to be signed into law by Governor Lamont. As this bill was sent over to his desk yesterday, and as of the start of this webinar, it has yet to be signed. We do know that his office is being inundated with calls to veto this bill. And so we can hope that this bill may get vetoed, but as of this moment, it has passed and it is awaiting signature. Next is House Bill 6240, an act concerning the health and welfare of animals sold at pet stores. We opposed this bill because it was, rather than banning animals being sold at pet stores, creating a certification process where breeding facilities can become credentialed and have a certificate follow the dog along or the animal along to the pet store. We believed that this wasn't actually addressing the issue, and wouldn't stop unethical behavior or inhumane conditions for these animals, and it would just add more bureaucracy and red tape to the process. And so we instead wanted to see an outright ban on this practice. So we opposed this because of that, and fortunately this bill did not advance. And last on this list is Senate Bill 1226. Had this bill passed, this bill would have allowed certain higher education institutions from not needing to include animal testing and research into Freedom of Information Act request reports. So it would have reduced visibility, reduced transparency when it comes to these things. And so we are very happy that this bill did not pass as well. Moving on to our priority legislative topics, first of which is second generation anticoagulant rodenticides. These rodenticides, these poisons, are counterproductive to their intended purpose because they are poisoning and harming the animals that naturally regulate rodent populations. And so we believe that an outright ban is needed. And that is what House Bill 6915 would have done. This bill would have banned the use of SJRs with a few exemptions. We were in strong support of it from the very beginning, and unfortunately, this bill did not advance. This was our preferred bill. The other bill that included SJR language was Senate Bill 9, which, rather than banning SJRs, would have reclassified them from general use to restricted use, meaning licensed applicators, which there are over 300 of in Connecticut, would still be allowed to use SJRs. And so we did not believe and do not believe that that would have solved any of the issues with SJR poisons, and in fact might have exacerbated them, because down the road, the thinking could be that this issue has been dealt with since SB 9 has passed. And so we've been in opposition to this bill from the start, and unfortunately, Senate Bill 9 did pass into law as Public Act 2533. And so I want to stop here briefly and ask Alexis, would you be able to provide us with some insight into this and why it was SB 9 that ended up passing instead of 6915?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Alexis Bourassa from Focus Government Affairs. Thanks for having me on tonight's call. So this was a untypical legislative session. The rodenticide bill that we saw, House Bill 6915, had the most co-sponsors of any bill this legislative session. Typically, in a normal year, this is a strong indicator and likely points to the passage of the legislative session. As we discovered throughout the legislative sessions, the Senate chair of the Environment Committee, Senator Lobes, poses a significant obstacle in moving the House bill forward and through the Senate. We had expected Senator Duff, who is a strong ally, to help and shepherd the House version through the Senate, but ultimately he stood by his Senate chair and the weaker version of the two bills was passed, and they were roped into Senate Bill 9. I'll touch a little bit about more on to why so many bills got roped into other pieces of legislation later, but I think we can point to Senator Lopes as a big point of contention there.
Got it. Thank you for that insight there. So I think it's safe to say here that SJARs is unfinished business and is definitely something that we are going to be spearheading moving into 2026. Next, we have neonicotinoids. So in the same vein as SJARs, neonicotinoids are very dangerous insecticides that threaten the existence of over 200 animals and insects, which makes up more than 11% on the endangered species list. And so just like with SJRs, we believe that an outright ban is needed for neonics in the state. And House Bill 6916 is a step in the right direction. It prohibits most uses, including on turfs and grass, on property owned by or leased to the state or municipality. And most importantly, it would have disallowed seeds, corn, wheat, and soybean seeds coated in neonics from being used without a waiver, which is just a few exemptions similar to the 6915 bill. And so we were in strong support of this bill from the start. And unfortunately, this bill did not advance. And that is because this language for neonics was also included in Senate Bill 9, as Alexis was just briefly touching upon. So Senate Bill 9, much more lax language. It would still allow neonics and still does allow neonics to be used in agriculture, and our seeds, our shrubbery and trees, still allows neonics to be used in personal care products, pet care, for veterinary purposes, and for indoor and structural pest control. So there are a lot of loopholes here, a lot of ways in which neonics can still be used. We were in opposition to this language from the beginning, and again, SB 9 did pass. So with this, there were efforts by CBA to get neonic and SJR language amended and removed from Senate Bill 9 towards the very end of the session. And unfortunately, those efforts were in vain as well. And so, Alexis, is there any more insight here that you want to provide between the difference in these two bills?
I think ultimately there was some appetite to do something this legislative session. And despite the language being watered down, Senator Duff especially was spearheading this effort to get this bill across the finish line. Senate Bill 9, almost from the beginning of session, was set to be passed. Just a little bit of insight on that. When you look at the top 10 Senate bills, so the lowest numbers, Senate Bill 9 falls under that, which means it's a Senate priority bill. So because there was some appetite and Senate Bill 9 had a very strong likelihood of passing, we can assume that is why it got roped into this legislation. But as Joshua said, with the SGARs, there's still work to be done on the neonic end as well.
Mhm. Definitely still some unfinished business. And apologies to all attendees. I had forgot to mention at the beginning of this webinar that we will be opening up a Q&A section at the end for you guys to ask your questions, and for myself and Alexis to answer them. So please feel free to start plugging those into the Q&A portion of the webinar here. And towards the very end, we will go ahead and start answering those questions. Moving on to preventing rabbit farming. This bill has come up in multiple past legislative sessions and will continue to come up. For the 2025 session, the vehicle for this topic was House Bill 5134, which would have provided a way for rabbit meat to make it onto our grocery store, our grocery store shelves and into our restaurants. Proponents of this bill believe that the current supply of rabbit meat does not meet the demand. And there is very minimal evidence to support that notion. And so we at CBA are in strong opposition to this bill, primarily because of a lack of support indicating that our current supply doesn't meet demand, but also because of the welfare of the animals, of the rabbits. Rabbits are not included in the USDA's definition of livestock, which means that the very minimal protections that are warranted to animals that are included in that definition do not apply to rabbits. So rabbits oftentimes are put into very barbaric and inhumane conditions, with very disgusting, frankly, slaughtering practices. And so we just do not believe that there is a place for that in Connecticut. And we are very happy to inform you all that this bill did die in committee. This is a wonderful example of the benefits, the strengths of grassroots legislative advocacy. This bill had a public hearing on March 3rd, 2025. And if you are to go in and look at all of the testimony that was submitted in support of this bill, you'll find that there were 7 pieces submitted in support, while there were 568 pieces of testimony submitted in opposition to this bill. And Alexis, this is definitely a win for animals. And I know that there was a big shift in attitude about this bill leading up to the public hearing and then after it. So could you provide us with some, insight into what that is, what happened there?
Well, I think there was appetite to do something for sure. And it's my understanding that they agreed to hold a public hearing and get stakeholder feedback. As Joshua said, the power of advocacy and grassroots was clearly proven here. And I think based off of last session and sessions before, there is continued to be strength in numbers. And many legislators have come out in opposition of this legislation and have heard from their constituents that this is not the route we should be going. And it was clearly proven based off of the number of opposing testimony that should this bill had passed out of committee, there would have been a fight to be put up.
Thank you. Thank you. Moving forward to bear hunting. This is something, again, that we want to prevent at all costs. There is zero evidence to support the notion that hunting reduces human and bear conflicts. And on the contrary, evidence suggests that hunting increases these conflicts. And so the real solution here is public education and public awareness, and that is what we continually advocate for. There were a few vehicles that were in the public hearing process, but two bills came out of the public hearing process, and the first of which is Senate Bill 1523. This bill would have laxed requirements and restrictions for non-lethal use and would have made it much easier for people to receive a permit to kill wildlife. And we were in strong opposition to this bill, and fortunately, this bill did not advance. The other bill about bear hunting was House Bill 7051. This would have required the development of a black bear management plan, but most importantly, it would have created an avenue for the implementation of, quote, any appropriate black bear population control measures, which that type of language is, and Alexis, you can add here too, but that language just allows for the loophole where the commissioner of deep can say, well, any appropriate black bear population control measure is a bear hunt. And so this bill, again, we strongly opposed, and fortunately, it did not advance. Now, I know, Alexis, Senate Bill 1523 went back and forth between the House and the Senate. There were various amendments that were made on this bill. So could you walk us through what the last few days of the session were like and, pertaining to Senate Bill 1523 and ultimately like the outcome of it?
Sure. Yeah, the last few days of session is kind of a sprint to the finish line. This is really when the House and the Senate start exchanging each other's pieces of legislation. So Senate Bill 1523 obviously started in the Senate, where they proposed an amendment that was kind of lax, in my opinion. This went down to the House, and the House ended up adopting their amendment, but then immediately striking that amendment to provide their own language. When this happens, because it was a Senate bill, the bill did have to go back up to the Senate floor. So, given the last few days of the session, you're on a time crunch. Timing was played the biggest role and did us the biggest favor, I believe, in my opinion, which ultimately contributed to the demise of this bill. So, given the fact that the House did adopt their own version of or their own amendment on this legislation, like I said, it would have had to gone back up to the Senate, and at that point, it might have been too late and might have taken up too much air in the room, so they decided not to move forward with this.
So if there were, a few extra days in the session, could you walk us through what that disagreeing action process looks like? If it bounces between both chambers a few times, what then takes place?
Sure. I mean, the bill can bounce between the chambers as many times as they want. So in this scenario, if the House adopted the Senate amendment and then turned around and adopted their own amendment, the bill would have to go back up to the Senate for approval at that point. Um, and if the Senate rejected that amendment, then it would still have to go back down to the House. So there's a lot of different steps in that jurisdiction where at the end of the day, the bill, no matter how many times it bounces between each chamber, has to end in an agreeing action, passing both chambers with either the amendments or non-amendments. Um, had this legislation been a big enough priority, they could have looped it into the budget or a more of an aircraft carrier bill. And then in that sense, they wouldn't have to bounce it between chambers. They could put whatever language they would want in, because ultimately the budget would pass regardless. But as a standalone bill, they would have had to come to some sort of agreeing action.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you for that information. So for the 2025 session, this was certainly a win for animals, but just like with the rabbit farming, we know that bear hunting is going to come back, and it's something that we definitely need to keep our eye on. Last priority topic of the night is expanding Desmond's Law. For those that aren't familiar, Desmond's Law was enacted in 2016, and it enables courts to appoint legal advocates to represent dogs and cats in animal cruelty cases. It essentially is giving these animals a voice. One of the main issues here when it comes to animal cruelty in Connecticut is that it is on the rise. From 2023 to 2024, there was a 36% increase in animal cruelty incidents, and data indicates that this trend is only continuing. In 2025, animal cruelty incident reporting has almost doubled compared to 2024. And so, one of our mission aligned organizations, the one that is primarily responsible for the passage of Desmond's Law, which is Desmond's Army, just created a report about the increasing animal cruelty cases in Connecticut. This report is on the cusp of being made to the public, and so when that is available, we will surely let you all know. This is a wonderful, in-depth, very detailed report all about the rise in animal cruelty cases in Connecticut. The main bill pertaining to Desmond's Law unfortunately isn't directly applicable to the expansion of Desmond's Law. There wasn't any clear legislation about maybe changing the definition or expanding animals that can be covered under Desmond's Law. And so the primary bill that we focused on this session was House Bill 6761. This would have prohibited the use of accelerated rehabilitation by anyone charged with animal abuse. Accelerated rehabilitation programs, or AR, are primarily for nonviolent and low recidivism rate crimes, and that neither of those fit animal cruelty. Obviously, very violent and also very high recidivism rates for animal cruelty offenses. And so we're in strong support of this bill. But just unfortunately, due to the nature of the legislature, this bill did die in committee. And so, in large part, from the survey that we had created and all of our members completed leading up to the 2025 session, this is going to be one of our priorities moving forward in the 2026 session. And we'll go into this a little bit here, but for right now, this is unfinished business and definitely something that we will be addressing in 2026. And so with that, let's get into our 2026 legislative agenda. The 2026 session is a short session, and the way in which legislation is able to be proposed is different as well. It can't just be from an individual legislator, it needs to come out of a committee. And due to that, along with the short session, we know that we need to narrow our focus. And so we have shifted from 5 priority legislative topics down to 2. The first of which is banning the use of poisons, including both SJRs and neonicotinoids. And the second is addressing animal cruelty, due to, in large part, from that survey where the vast majority said that animal cruelty was their number one issue. The 2 of the many topics that we want to address when it comes to animal cruelty is prohibiting AR use in animal cruelty cases and expanding animals that can be covered, that are covered under Desmond's Law. Currently, it is just dogs and cats. We would love to see that expanded to companion animals and maybe have a companion animal definition put into Connecticut law so that we can ensure that they are protected. Outside of these two, there are still many, many topics that we are going to continue to support. Some of which, but this is not an exhaustive list, is preventing rabbit farming, preventing bear hunting, banning shark finning, banning lighter than air balloons, leg hold traps, cat declawing, and prohibiting pet stores from selling dogs, cats, and rabbits. Again, this is not exhaustive. We are going to continue to advocate for the benefit of animals whenever and wherever we could. But for starters, right now, this is where we're at. And like we have done during the 2025 session, as legislation comes up, we'll issue our action alerts, and yeah, you guys will get the ball rolling there. And so quickly before we open up to a Q&A session for all of you, just wanted to ask Alexis a few questions. So what would you say, Alexis, was the highlight of the session for you?
For me, I always have a strong soft spot and a sense of pride seeing everything come to light at the end of the session. There's nothing more rewarding and powerful than seeing something you worked hard on or played a part in either passing or not making it across the finish line, because that's also a win. So I can't point to something specific, but just even when it comes to rabbit farming, the number of folks in, I guess, opposition that came out to oppose that legislation was a huge surprise and played a massive role in that piece of legislation not advancing. So when you're so intimately involved in a piece of legislation like that, there is a sense of pride in, preventing bad things from happening and helping good things happen as well.
Mhm. That kind of rolls right into my second question, which is, what came as your biggest surprise? Would it be that rabbit farming bill, or is there something else there?
Um, I would say the biggest surprise was probably the amount of aircraft carrier bills. So when we talk about aircraft carrier bills, we're talking about a piece of legislation that has several other pieces of legislation roped into it. So when we look at Senate Bill 9, we know for a fact at least two other bills or language from other bills were included in that legislation in one form or another. Typically, the budget and the budget implementer are the two biggest aircraft carrier bills of the legislative session, meaning anything that couldn't pass as a standalone bill has an opportunity to reignite within that budget. However, this session was a little bit different, and we saw a lot of standalone bills that were incorporated, especially in the last few days of session, into other pieces of legislation. For example, the Senate Bill 9 that I already talked about almost had a guarantee of passing given it was a Senate priority bill. So, with the timing of how the session worked out and the lack of timing that was left, we did see a lot of amendments drop, which would have included pieces of legislation into other bigger aircraft carrier bills like Senate Bill 9.
Okay, and last question for you here is there a message that you would like to share with our CBA members?
I think this kind of goes along with my answer to the first question. Um, Advocacy. There is nothing more powerful and more important than legislators hearing from their constituents, and it clearly works. We're going back to the farming bill again. That played a huge role in the bill not advancing out of committee, which was a huge win for CBA and for the community. And I always like to talking to a legislator can be intimidating. So my advice to everyone is always to get to know your legislator. All of them host coffee hours. Follow them on social media. Check out when they're going to have a coffee hour and go meet them. They love to hear from their constituents, and sometimes by getting to know their constituents, they take an ask more seriously, an ask or a concern. And you never want the first time meeting your representative or senator to be with an ask or to be with a concern. So a message I would like to share is just get to know your elected officials. A lot of them are like me and you, and they want to hear from you. They work for you, so they should be able to get to know you and listen to your concerns and your priorities as well.
Thank you for that, Alexis. And so now opening it up to a Q&A with you, our members. We do have a few questions here, and so I'll get started with our first one. First question is, how can we get a bill for low-cost spay and neuter for all in Connecticut? How and when will this crisis in Connecticut be addressed? How can we get a bill to address for a general fund for all to apply to for help with veterinary care? Um, that is a great question. It is definitely something that falls under animal cruelty. Oftentimes, people believe that animal cruelty is just violence against an animal, and they don't understand that negligence also plays a role. One of the main ways that we at CVA are trying to address this issue, and many like it, is by educating. There are multiple webinars and educational events that we, along with our parallel organization, Connecticut for Animals Education Fund, will be promoting, all about understanding what animal cruelty is. And it starts with that educational piece. With education comes advocacy. And so us and other mission aligned organizations are definitely going to be looking into this and see how we can coordinate our efforts to get legislation of this nature passed, ensure that there are legislators that are in support and will champion bills like that aligned with us to answer this issue. The next is, how many members belong to the Animal Welfare Caucus, and how successful has the caucus been in influencing legislative success? Alexis, do you have any information you could provide on that one?
I don't have any specific information. I will say, so Representative Nicole Claridis Detria is a chair of the caucus, and she was co-chaired or a co-chair with Representative David Michel. So unfortunately, David did not win re-election, so the caucus hasn't been as active this past year. Typically, you'll find about 30 members of the caucus from both the House, the Senate, Republicans, and Democrats. Which is great because it's a bipartisan caucus, which you don't always find. So they have been successful in other years, especially when it comes to raising legislation. I will say they haven't been as active this past year, but it's something that they're working to reignite this upcoming session.
All right, thank you. Next question. Can we please make the banning of glue traps for mice and rats a priority? This is something that has been, that has come up in several years. And I agree with this question that it is a cruel and horrendous task. And so very much in line with the banning of poisons, we want as ethical as possible, uh, rodent population methods to be used. And I can certainly see something like this being looped into those types of endeavors. But when it comes to a short session, it is hard to try to get everything accomplished, and so narrowing the focus is essential. This is certainly something that education can play a role in as well. Next question. Generally, what are the requirements, restrictions for adding substantive bill language to the must-pass budget bill?
So typically, or what it used to be, was anything related to budget language would pass in the budget bill. In recent years, the legislature and Connecticut General Assembly has found some loopholes in that and have expanded it to virtually anything. So while technically on the books there might be some restrictions, a lot passes in the budget that is not budget related at all. If you look at this year's budget bill, it's about 900 pages, and I would say only about a tenth of that maybe is related to the budget. So you will see some bigger pieces of legislation fall into those, and that goes for any bill. It doesn't always have to be of cognizance, even though it's technically should be.
Mhm. Another question pertains to the increase in animal cruelty. Why are our state leaders ignoring this? I certainly can't speak for our state leaders, but if I had to guess, it's something that they don't want to address because they don't want it to be true. They don't want to draw attention to it, and would like to see these cases, be thrown out rather before that information can be publicized and be compiled into the data area, the buckets that it falls in. And I certainly do not support that type of decision making, and needs to be addressed for sure. But that's only my guess. That's only my opinion on it. I am not exactly sure why this is being ignored.
And I think just to add to that too, Connecticut's always been hesitant to take action on anything that may impose stricter penalties or laws. But I think once the data is released, especially with the Desmond's Army, I believe it was the study, I think that will be very telling and shock a lot of legislators and hopefully results in some sort of action there.
Sorry, just going through here. Next question is, I am strongly against bear hunting. One concern I have is the explosion of the bear population. I like to go hiking with my dogs, and I carry a stick with bells on it to announce our arrival. And after several close encounters, I am becoming more afraid than I used to be. Could a sterilization plan be implemented? I think this is a wonderful question, and definitely is in line with the public education that's needed about luring bears into kind of human environments and allowing us to coexist peacefully. When it comes to a sterilization plan itself, I am not too familiar, with an ethical way of going about a sterilization plan. I know that the state of New Jersey has issued some press releases about a sterilization plan, and talk about some untested chemicals and not wanting to move forward with that and trying to use alternative methods instead. Um, but that is certainly something that CBA can provide more information on in the future. Anytime there's a question on here that I'm not entirely familiar with, I like to go ahead and do some research on my own and then provide that information. So I will certainly follow up when it comes to a bear sterilization plan. Next question is, how can we get judges to impose serious jail time and or restitution from convicted animal abuse cases? Too often AR is given in the hopes of education and reforming individuals. Um, this is not an area that I have much expertise in. Alexis, do you have any insight
Well,
there?
I think the first step is legislation. The legal aspect of this, they do follow Connecticut general statutes in some capacity. So I think this being a priority of CVA next session, once we get some sort of legislation on the books, would be a huge step forward in increasing penalty and jail time.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that is a wonderful answer to, the another question that we have about like how can we get a bill passed about animal cruelty is just, you know, getting that legislation passed and imposing jail time and increasing fees for sure. And that I'm just going to go through quickly and make sure that that is our last question here. It does seem to be the last question. If anybody has any questions before we wrap up. This session had the most sponsors yet to ban inhumane, barbaric leg hold traps, not banning all trapping, but allowing humane box and cage traps as the law in MA could be a model. That is a good point. Yes, there were many bills um, talking or pertaining to leg hold traps and trying to get them banned, and just the legislative support um, was not there this time around. It seemed that the priority lied elsewhere, which is very unfortunate, and certainly something that, again, this falls under animal cruelty, which is one of our priorities going into this upcoming session. And sorry, Marla, I missed I had a question for who pays for strays? Oh, I'm sorry. Who pays for the thousands and thousands of ownerless animals dying on the streets? Um, do mostly cats. But I am not sure where the funding comes from for um, the ownerless animal population in the state. I do know that there are a lot of communities that do unfortunately have to pick up the cost of this. And again, same thing when it comes to a bear sterilization program. Um, this is certainly something that I will do some more research on, and we will get this out as a follow-up to this webinar for some of our unanswered questions. Yeah, Marla, sorry about that. Last question is any tips on people bringing for people that want to bring in their food during the months when bears are active? Just obviously, yeah, bringing them in during the months of from March to November, and keeping it locked and enclosed in as smell proof a box as possible, right? Same thing goes for your trash, putting it in a bear proof trash container. And so just making it as impossible as it can be for bears to not get into those food receptacles. So inside of your garage, in your basement if possible, somewhere that bears have a tough time getting into, because the more effort needed for bears to get to the food, the less inclined these bears are to go for it. There is they have such incredible noses that if they need to put in effort, they can smell that there is more readily available food elsewhere and they will move on. And that seems to be it. Nancy asked, how can we build a legislative group that will advocate for animals? There are the Animal Welfare Caucus that we just mentioned about, that Alexis just talked about, but honestly, it is about the mission aligned organizations, the pro animal welfare organizations, getting legislators to champion specific bills. Um, Alexis, if you want to maybe briefly speak again to the Animal Caucus and maybe the future outlook for the Animal Caucus.
Sure. Representative Nicole Claridis Detria has been a wonderful advocate on behalf of animals and animal welfare in the state. She has been there for years and she has championed a ton of legislation along with others in the General Assembly. I think a lot of folks in the Connecticut General Assembly are pro-animal, and I think they just need to hear it from their constituents. So reaching out to those legislators and just encouraging them to get more involved. There is a large number of legislators who are very new who may not even know a animal caucus exists. So I encourage all of you to reach out to your legislators, encourage them to get more involved and join the caucus, and we will work to help revive that caucus as well.
Mhm.
Um, and I just saw a question pop up that if people can join the Animal Welfare Caucus. Yeah, caucuses are open to anyone. So I'm not sure of the status of it at this point, but I will happily reach out to some of the folks who I know who have been involved in the past and then get back to Joshua and the folks at CVA with more answers on how other legislators can get involved too.
Perfect. Thank you, Alexis. And with that, I think we are going to end it here. I will certainly provide some follow-up information on the two questions that I was unable to answer. So thank you all CBA members for joining us tonight for our 2025 legislative recap. Thank you, Alexis, for providing such invaluable information. And let's all take a deep breath and prepare for 2026. Thank you guys, and I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful night. Take care.